Hey everybody, it's Jeremy from Jeremy.net. We're a comic book artist, writer, creator, self-publisher, and I share my creative process here with you online. If you enjoy these live streams, would like to get additional bonus live streams twice a month, you can become a Patreon subscriber for as little as $2 a month. Head on over to patreon.com/Jeremy. It's patreon.com/GERIMI. If you'd like to get a free digital sketchbook, work in progress animated GIFs delivered right to your inbox, blog posts about what I'm reading, what I'm watching, what's inspiring me creatively, you can sign up for my free monthly newsletter at newsletter.jeremy.net. And if you'd like to purchase physical copies of my comics, or if you read digitally on Kindle, you can go to amazon.jeremy.net. They'll forward you to my Amazon author page where you can pick all of these books up. And on that note, we have returning guest, good friend, and friend of the live stream, John Ercek, great color artist, comic creator, art instructor. John, welcome back. Good to see you. How you doing?
It's very good to be here. How are you doing? It's kind of, this time I actually have the live display up, so that's actually throwing me off for a quick second there. But anyway, yeah. So I'm doing good today. It was good seeing you at WonderCon, and I saw last week's stream, and I was in the chat, of course. And watching you talk about proportions made me think about some of the exercises I have my students do when we're learning proportions. So I thought it'd be kind of good to check in with you, and thanks for having me on.
All right, well, that's great. I love that. I'm glad you reached out. Anytime I have a chance to learn from an instructor, I'm like, hey, yes, please share the knowledge. And you're right. I definitely mentioned that proportion is one of the things I struggle with. So,
well, that's the thing. I struggled with proportions a lot in college, and it kind of sucked because from my experience in college, the teachers we had in college, what they did know and what they didn't know, but I did feel like there wasn't any like real good technique for learning proportions, and I was desperate, and I like looked around what I could find at the time. Now, granted, college was 200 years ago, but so it was like you had to go to the library to access anything, and the only thing I found on terms of like trying to improve your proportions was an instructor, I think it was from Art Center, had said a good exercise was to take three coat hangers, and lay them out on the floor in a way that they intersect and draw them, and you would learn proportions. And that was so esoteric, I didn't even try it.
That sounds like some witch doctor voodoo.
Yeah. But I kind of understand why he suggested it. The issue is you need to have some way of validating what you're doing in order to see whether or not what you're doing is right or wrong. And when you are in a figure drawing class and you're drawing the figure, you don't really have that. You don't have the ability to take your drawing and overlay it against what you're seeing from the figure like you would if you're working from a photograph in Photoshop, and you can overlay it at a 50% transparency. Then you can see, okay, I did it right or I did it wrong. When you're in figure drawing class, all you had was an instructor looking over your shoulder, and he would say, nope, that's right, or no, that's wrong, or maybe this, or maybe that, or maybe they'll use soft language on you because they can tell how strong your ego is, which 20-year-old kids in college, how strong is your ego, while at the same time trying to admit
there's a range. There is incredibly delicate, and there's hard-headed as hell.
But, yeah, absolutely. So
did you put any stock in the whole having your arm at arm's length and using the pencil, just that measuring device?
Yeah, but the problem with that measuring device is, what are you measuring? Because we like, okay, I know point A to point B, okay, that's one length. Point B to point C, okay, that's one length. Then you're like, okay, one head, and then what's one head below? Like, what are you supposed to see there? And then how many heads down do you go? And we'll get into that a little bit when we get into when I start doing a little bit of demos here. That there are certain things we learn that are very counterproductive to learning proportions, and so I thought it'd be a good opportunity, just come on and say, yeah, some of the things that we learn just don't work, and we have to try different approaches. And just as a clue to that, this whole idea of measuring everything in heads high, that's a problem. So we're going to get around that.
All
But
right.
so I'm going to take you, if you are up for it, we're going to go through the exercises I make my students do. And I assume I was hoping you'd follow along.
Oh
Assuming you
no, I
would.
was totally going to ask you if you want me to watch and then draw afterwards, or just I'll draw while you're drawing and just follow your exercise.
Yeah, just I mean, I think it would be good for you to draw while following along, but then you'll probably have to do it again because I'm not sure if you want to share your screen while you're drawing as well.
No, I want to
But,
share your story. I want people to see what you're doing, so I can always just show my stuff at the end. But
yeah.
we'll run with you. In
Now,
fact, let me.
one thing I'll say real fast is you're using Procreate. Do you I hate Procreate. I've actually gotten to a point where I actively encourage my students not to use Procreate, especially if they have access to Photoshop. But one thing I want to ask you: are you comfortable like making selections and pulling from your drawing and flattening them back down when you're?
Yeah, I'm fine with that. And I'm gonna make you the solo layout so that you're gonna be large in the screen.
All right, cool enough. All right, so the first thing I do with my students, I started off with a square. I should have started off with like a traditional paper, and that does. Okay, so first off, just warm up exercises. I always start off 3 lines across the top of the sheet of paper. I'm feeling a little cold, and then I do 3 lines back the other way, right? Just seeing how my lines are doing. Now, some of these exercises do work a little bit better in real life or in natural medium, but I think we'll manage to do this okay with what we're doing. And I can tell that I'm still a little bit cold, so I'm going to do what I call the crosshair exercise. I know you've done these exercises with me before, right, Jeremy? Where we draw a crosshair and we try to draw a line going straight through. And you can see how wobbly my line is, which means, yeah, I'm very cold today. The thing about these exercises is when you are drawing naturally or when you're drawing to get something done, you don't live by the rules of these exercises. If you need to draw a straight line, you just hold down your shift key and you draw a straight line from wherever it needs to go, right? But these exercises are intended for you to improve your draftsmanship abilities so that way you can become a more solid artist over time. Look at how wobbly that line is. It's just like, that's a very cold hand.
I have a question for you. Do
Yeah.
you find there to be a direct relationship between using your whole arm to draw and how smooth of a line you can make?
Very much so. One of my problems right now is since I'm working on my tablet and I have a condensed space, I'm not able to use my shoulder. I'm only using my elbow and my wrist, and that's why we're seeing such wobbly lines. If I can get to a position where I can use my shoulder a little bit more. Now, granted, that's a skill that does take time, and you have to develop even your muscles. Like when I was in college, my teacher called it the toothbrush muscle. It's because the outside of your shoulder will start getting really tired when when you start drawing with your shoulder, and you haven't been doing it a lot. So this just ends up being part and parcel to the process. I didn't say that 3 times fast, but it's what every artist goes through if they try to do as they enhance their skills. So what I am realizing today is I have a real problem with lines going up at this angle. So I'm going to try to avoid them as much as possible. If I start off a day like this where I realize my line's going up from the lower right to the upper left, or low outside, high inside, because I'm right-handed, when I realize that, then I realize that if I'm going to make a drawing, I'm going to start rotating as much as possible just so I can go with the lines that I'm more comfortable with, and then I'm just going to have to rotate back for the other way. But when we're doing these exercises, we keep the paper straight for the sake of enhancing and increasing our range of motion.
Yeah, I know, because definitely, the whole point of drawing digital is to take advantage of our natural arc of our movement. But I mentioned the thing about drawing with the whole arm because as soon as I started doing that exercise, I had the same problem that you had. And I realized I have my tablet set up so that my drawing board's at an angle, but my tablet is at an even higher angle so that I can push myself physically away from my tablet and draw so that I've got kind of not a full arm's length, but sitting back from the tablet and drawing like I would if I were in a figure drawing class.
Yeah. And I remember you talking about that last week, the sacrifices streamers make for the sake of showing their skills online, right? Like you have to turn your head to the side so that way the camera behind you can see your drawing boards. I've seen streamers having to do that. It's just like, sometimes it's not worth it, but of course it's worth it to share it with the community. So I hope the community appreciates it. Okay, so we got our hands warmed up. We're good to go. Now let's start some actual proportion exercises.
All right.
And the first one is very simple. We're going to draw 3 lines, and they have to be different lengths. Okay? So we got 3 lines, and I didn't make a fuss over like which angles we draw them at. Later I'm going to. And what I want you to do is, without zooming in, this is one part where this works better in natural media. Without zooming in, try to guess where the midpoint is of your lines. Okay? So this is just very basic. How do you measure anything if you can't figure out where the midpoint is? And then what we have to do is, once you make your guesses, you can zoom in if you need to. But when you make your guesses, then what we do is we have to validate. We have to see, was our guess good? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a copy of 1/2 of my length. I'm going to zoom in, and I'm going to see here that, yeah, that was pretty much spot on. Now, the shorter lengths are usually easier than the longer lengths. So I'm going to do the same thing for my other 2 lengths. And it's actually easier if you change your layer to...
Here's a thought. What about duplicating the entire layer and then just dragging it over?
Well, that works. That's good. Let's see. I'll give it a shot. Why not?
I'm just lazy. That's why I look at this. I was like, I can go and do this one by one, or I can just grab all of them at once and just move them over.
Well, if they do the same, if they're the same angle, then I guess that works. Or you can always just rotate the. Look at how far off this one is. Right. The one downside is you do need to make a mark. You need to actually tell yourself, I messed up. You have to go through the process of saying, this length was not good. I messed up. Okay. So
I see what you're saying.
So here I can see that as I'm getting longer, I'm messing up a little bit. Okay. So we repeat the process 2 more times. And this time, try drawing lines at different lengths. And make sure, oh God, there I am doing the angle I'm not good at right now. So make sure.
We're drawing at different angles now.
Yeah, and this time I'm trying different angles too. And so I'm going to try to find the midpoint. I find shadowing over the line and just sort of like you get a feel in your muscle memory for how far you're moving, and then you sort of just feel what's half of my movement. I feel the shadow movement helps out a lot. All right, so now at different angles, how's this work out when we're trying to do this? All right, short one, not so bad. Second one, off by just a little bit. I'm going to give it a little mark. And then third one, whoops, go down this way. Ooh, third one, I'm like incredibly short.
I'm noticing that the first one I do tends to be the best one.
Yeah. Wonder, I wish I could say I had an explanation for that, but I don't.
Well, I think it's that when you're drawing something shorter, the margin for error, oddly enough, is greater, but it seems like the longer you go, it's almost like the equivalent of zooming in, like how you can see more flaws when you zoom in. I feel like you can see, like, if you're off by just a little bit, but the drawing is pretty small, then it's like that little bit. You know, it's weird because it's actually the inverse. Because if you're drawing a small figure and you've got an eye off, that eye will look off by a mile. Where if you're drawing a big figure and it's off by a little bit, it looks well, but it looks, you know, it's unnoticeable. But it seems like it's the reverse with this, and I don't know why.
Yeah, so we're actually going to get into that a little bit later when we start drawing the human figure. And I was thinking about this morning. You know how they do the exercise in a lot of art schools where you have to draw a human figure life size. And I was thinking about that, and I was just like, is that harder or easier, and why?
Mm.
And what I realized is it's harder to fudge a large drawing, but it's easier to measure. So that's what you have two positives working in your favor to actually make that an easier experience. So this was kind of interesting on this one, Jeremy. I got my first one was off, but my other two were spot on. So what I realized was you said your first ones were easier, but you also um, we were focused more on. I was focused more on order instead of the fact that your first ones were the shorter ones, right? And usually shorter ones are easier to measure because you sort of can see the whole length in your eye's focal zone. Whereas the longer the line gets, you start to move outside of your eye's focal zone, and you actually have to move your eye to start to figure out what you're looking at, and that can affect how well you can make your guesses over what is the midpoint of your line. But yeah, we're definitely going to talk about the fact that when you're drawing smaller versus when you're drawing larger, whether or not it's easier or harder to get your proportions correctly, especially when we're dealing with figure drawing. I did this one other one, so let's do this. And after this, we're going to move into some other exercises. Okay, this one wasn't this, unfortunately. But we get an idea of how we're doing. And usually, if you do this 4 or 5 times, you start to improve and you start to get a lot better with your lines. Okay? So what we do next is the opposite. We'll do 3 lines, kind of short, different angles, okay? And then right underneath it, try to draw a line that's twice as far.
Ooh.
All right. So now I feel like I didn't shadow that second one good enough. And honestly, so one of the things is you can cheat this a little bit where you can say, okay, I'm just going to hold down my shift key and get a straight line. But still, it's good
That's
practice.
not the point of the exercise.
Yeah, but it's good practice to actually move your hand and get the muscle reps in. All right. And so here, this is definitely an area where it's probably easier to just make your selection and duplicate it up, and we'll see if it's a good length. That one is. We'll select this one, duplicate it up. I'm going to have to change it to multiply. There's too much white at the very end of it. That one's pretty good. That one's slightly longer, not so bad. Oh god, this third one where I actually held the shift key, this one was really bad. How are you doing with these, Jeremy?
The first one was spot on. And I can already tell you that the third one was way off because as soon as I finished the line, I could tell that I didn't go far enough, but I decided as opposed to dragging it, as opposed to undoing and doing again, I said just live with the fact that you made a mark and it's wrong.
Yeah, I think there is a little bit to be said. Like normally, I'm definitely in favor of that, but I think there is a little bit to be said. Like, okay, wait a minute, this is wrong. I'm going to add just like go ahead and make another mark. Like if I make a mark like this, and then I'm gonna make a mark like this, I'm like, okay, wait, there's something not right there. Shadow it, shadow it, shadow it. I know it's here. Okay. So like I do feel like this is actually good practice for correcting yourself, and then you can see. And one of the nice things here, especially in this one, is that we can see how far off I originally was, and then I can see how well I'm doing when it comes to correcting. Oh, I'm on the layer there. Okay, there we go. All right. So there we go. We know here, like, so let's say this line ended up being like right here. It's like, well, the second one's better than the first. Or let's say the ending came in here, then I realized, okay, my corrections are really bad. So that type of validation and that type of feedback can be really helpful for you as well. So, and that's what you need to focus on. Am I cheating or am I getting a good feedback loop for the sake of,
well, I can switch the screen real quick so that you can see. Like now, if you look over, I switched over to my screen.
Right.
And you can see.
Oh
So
yeah, I see that one. That one was really short.
yeah.
Absolutely. Like if you realize it's really short, I would say just go for it. Give yourself a longer line, so that way it's like, because you're only going to learn so much. What you need to learn is, was it good or was it bad? If you make a line and you know it was bad, you've got the feedback already. So go for the correction and get more information. And this is about a process of failing and then succeeding, and you'll get better over time as you're doing these exercises. Okay, so to the extent that anybody wants to keep practicing that one because they feel they need to keep themselves warming up or get a better feel, they can do that. But let's move on to another one. What we're going to do is we're going to make a short length, okay? And like, okay, keep it making that length and make it 5 times, okay? All right, so I did this length 5 times. Now what I need to do is I need to see whether or not I kept making this length accurately for the sake of making it 5 times, okay? And I see here, it looks like I kind of got a little bit longer. That one was shorter, you know, but the 3 in the middle don't really matter. They're actually a distraction. What we're trying to figure out is, can I maintain the same length for 5 repetitions, okay? So I'm going to shadow my movement and say, okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I'm going to go ahead and ask you, Jeremy, can you guess why an exercise like this might be important?
Measuring heads or measuring, well,
yeah,
to make comparative measurements up and down a figure.
Yeah, exactly. And this is one of the reasons why I have such an issue with measuring using heads as a measuring device. Because when I was in college and I would start doing, oh, this is a great example here of how bad this can be. I'm gonna try to fix this last one. When I was in college and I was having trouble with proportions, one of my biggest problems was my thighs were getting really long. They would just stretch. And there's a couple of different reasons for that. One of them being I'm a tall guy and I have some really long thighs. But the other problem is this is not a good way of doing anything systematically, where you try to do one thing at one length and then you repeat the length. I'm going to do a staircase for this one because it's going to be so long it's going to go off the page. So I have this length. I'm going to try to keep this length as best as I can as I move farther and farther away from it. And it's almost an impossible task. I don't see why people would do this to themselves, right? Let's see how this one compares. I got lucky. I got better. My skills have improved over the course of the stream, so I'm getting better at it. But it can be a very hit or miss affair. All right, we're going to do one more. And then we're going to talk about figure drawing as it relates to figure drawing. Like, this is what typically happens. Your lines either grow longer or they get shorter as you're trying to maintain 1 length, 2 length, 3 length, 4 length, 5 lengths, 6 lengths, 7 lengths, and 8 lengths. And of course, it's really rough if you're drawing from life, because frankly, the 8-headed figure is not that common in real life, or if you're drawing anything from photos. I usually find that torsos are a little bit longer and legs are a little bit shorter than what we see in our typical Loomis head or Loomis proportions. Even though the Loomis proportion, when it comes to the figure, the Loomis proportions are basically just the canon from Da Vinci. Going to make this figure 7.5 heads high. So what I've realized in my years since college is that using the head system to draw the figure can be very self-defeating. Because and to a certain extent, if you watch any of Proko's videos, he uses the unit of the skull figure because at least that's like a three-dimensional figure, and you can use that in a three-dimensional space.
Oh, hang on. Oh, okay, you're back. For a minute, your audio dropped out.
Oh.
It was just a second.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Still good then?
Yeah, we're good.
Okay. Well, that's the other problem. Sometimes I just stop talking. It's not the microphone, it's the mouth. Okay. Okay. So what I've realized since college is that we're better off if we approach the figure as a fractal, where we start off with our line, and especially if we start off with our line of action, and we find our midpoint. So this is just what we were doing earlier. We was like, okay, this is a line. Where's our midpoint? And then where's our midpoint again? And we're going to have a better chance of figuring out our proportions as they relate to the human figure. I'm going to put a rib cage here and put some eyes here. So let's I want to take a quick look at the questions.
Well, let's see. We had some.
Everybody's just talking mostly about drawing and using their elbow. Absolutely. Yeah, drawing with the elbow does make for a very rigid experience.
Yeah, I find, Soretzi Smith in the chat, he said, when I ink, my wrist is rigid, and I draw more with my elbow than anything else. I have found that actively trying to use the elbow and the shoulder together, it feels awkward when I start, but getting both of them to work, so that it's almost like having multiple points of rotation gives you a smoother line, whereas you've got like one level of rotation with just the wrist, two level with the wrist and the elbow, and then three with the wrist, elbow, and shoulder. And if you're using all of them in concert, it's almost like the three of them working together kind of help to correct the shimmy you get by just getting one, and it gives you a smoother line. And here's something I hadn't thought of. He also mentions holding his breath while he draws. So I haven't.
That's interesting. That's interesting. That I immediately think about photographers who have to hold their breath so they can they maintain a stable photo. My girlfriend Jen pops me on that all the time, since she's a photographer in the family. Not only that, because my photos are always blurry. But yeah, I definitely sympathize and understand with holding your breath, but that suggests you're going through, you're putting yourself through a period of angst. And I think it would behoove you to go through breathing exercises, keep your blood flowing at a calm rate so that you can maintain like just a calm presence while you're getting through your lines. It makes me worry that maybe you're stressed over trying to get the perfect line. And my attitude, for whatever it's worth, is you don't want drawing to be a stressful experience. You want drawing to be an embrace of the failure, and then a confidence that whatever your failure is going to be, you can overcome it by making a second line after it. There's only very few situations where you need to nail that line the very first time, and that's usually like when we're inking. But we have strategies for that. We get into a flow state, we warm up, we get comfortable, and we just understand like whatever our inking abilities are, that's what they're going to be. And if you really need to make a correction, well, we have whiteout and we have digital techniques for doing that too. So you don't need to.
And to be fair, he was referencing inking when he was talking about this. It wasn't drawing in general, but he was specifically talking about inking.
Yeah, that definitely is like a hold your breath and stop your heart type of activity. Okay, so here's the thing about proportions that really makes me kind of angry, is that I've noticed from different artists as I've watched them in figure drawing and in my classes, the ones who are good at proportion, they aren't actually great at proportion, they're actually relying on the crutch. And the crutch is very simple. How often when you draw a head, like you start with a circle, okay? And it seems like every time you draw a drawing and you start with a circle for the head, whatever direction it might be facing, you'll notice you always draw the same size circle. Have you noticed that, Jeremy?
It depends. I see where you're going in terms of like that same head syndrome or the same face syndrome. If I notice that someone has a squarer head versus a rounder head, then I'll try to intentionally, even before I put any features on, I'll try to take that into account.
Right. So you'll like if you're drawing like a more blockhead character, you might say that, or a more round character might be like that, right?
But if they don't have a very distinctly noticeable variance in their head shape, then yeah, the basic head I lay in will just be like they're all kind of the same.
Right. So, but my point, but to a certain extent, then, even though you have this variance in the heads, what happens is, like I just did this here, what we're doing is we're still working at the same scale, where we think, okay, this is a round head for like a round character, but this character has more elongated head, so it's like it's this head, but then just more jaw, right? And that's the thing that I notice about people who are good with proportion. So not great with proportion, what they're doing is they're always drawing at the same size. So there's like, they have their head that they're used to, this circle that they're comfortable drawing for their head. It's always the same size. And I call this the biological inch. It's like, this is your 1 inch unit measurement that you're used to drawing with. So you'll draw your one head, and then you'll draw another head. And we reinforce ourselves to always draw this same size every time we use the 8-head technique to draw the human body. And that's what really bothers me about this 8-head technique, is it reinforces us to constantly practice our muscle motion to draw one side circle, and then we get stuck into drawing the human figure in only one side that we're comfortable with. The downside of this is when we have to take our character and put the character in the layout, we are now sabotaging ourselves. Does that make sense?
It does. Can I throw something out here from figure drawing class?
Yeah.
I base the size of my drawings on the length of the pose. So I have a size at which I draw figures for 2-minute gestures. I draw them basically twice that size for 5 minutes. And then for an 8-minute or longer, I take up the whole sheet, which still drawing a whole sheet drawing a whole figure, taking up a whole page, that's still a consistent size. But having those couple of different sizes forces me on a regular basis to change it up.
Right. So you're halfway to where I'm trying to bring you. So what I need to find, so give me 1 second here. We're going to do just a quick switch over as I find out, as I make sure I don't grab a nude figure reference.
No problem. No problem. Appreciate that. Don't want to get
we don't need to put you in any problem with that.
Meanwhile, I noticed a couple of comments in the chat while you're looking there. I'll mention. Let's see here. So Amar is in the chat. Good to see you, man. Thanks for popping in. So Amar mentions, I think elbow or shoulder. It's more about holding the how you hold the pencil as well. And he said your wrist is key in drawing. He said if your wrists are rigid, it'll cause unwanted tension. Which that's a good point, because I do kind of try to keep my wrist. I try to keep my wrist stable while not being locked. So it's one of the things where I try to kind of hold it in the same position, but I try not to let anything in my hand. Like I almost feel like whether I'm penciling or inking, I'm trying to have whatever I'm drawing with glide across the surface as opposed to pressing down. Because I find that the gripping it and the pushing, those are the kind of things that for me I've seen lead to tendinitis and like just forearm pain. Whereas if I'm just sort of moving things across my drawing surface, it's like, oh, okay, it's nice, it's fluid, it's loose. Let's see here. Amar also mentions the typical approach I take is based on the situation. Said if it's for cartoons, it'll be different from comics and still different from doing fashion illustration. So if you're versatile, it's all about how flexible your style is. Some good points, Amar. He says, when I did fashion illustration in college, my head and figure was really exaggerated. And that's a good point, is that fashion illustration, very much, they'll do like 9, I've seen as crazy as 10 head tall figures where you've got like these little heads and these incredibly elongated bodies. That's definitely a different way of laying things out. Let's see here.
All right, so I picked out a pose here from our figure drawing, from my last figure drawing session. So I like using quickposes.com, and they have a wide assortment of photos. So if you've been on quickposes.com, you'll have seen this cosplayer comes up quite often. The shield ends up being an interesting little measuring device that you have to navigate around, and so it interferes with your understanding of the figure, and it's just a little bit more of a challenge. This exercise does have a hard mode where if you have a pose that's either more horizontal, or if you have a pose where the hand is raised completely above the head, that'll make things more challenging, but we'll get into that in a second. So here's what we're trying to do with this challenge. What we're trying to do is we're going to take this figure, and it's like you said, in your 2-minute drawings, you're drawing at one size. Your 4-minute drawings, you're drawing a little bit larger, and then finally your 8-minute drawings, you're drawing even larger. We're kind of doing the same thing, but we're doing it all at once, in that we're doing it with the same pose, and we're going to give ourselves the same amount of time. So I recommend this. This is a great exercise. If you have a 10-minute pose in your life drawing, you divide this time up into 5 minutes, and you do what you do is you give yourself a box that's small, and then you give yourself another box that's larger. And if the boxes, it's better if the boxes aren't 1 to 2, right? It's better if it's like they have a proportion that is not a 1 to 2 relationship, or is any type of nice even proportions. So one here, make a mark. If it look at that, I nailed it.
See, now you're in the habit of breaking things evenly. You did all the practice to get it just right. Now you can't break it.
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't even look right. It looked like it should be right, and like my boxes are even lopsided. But so you want to avoid that. But if it happens, it happens. Especially after we've just been practicing our proportions, it's totally gonna happen. So here's what we do. What we have to do is, this forces us, we can't come in here and say, well, okay, I think 1 head, 2 head, 3 head, 4 head, 5 head. No, we can't do that. Instead, what we have to do is this reinforces our line of action, where we come in here and we say, okay, our waist is going to be down here, and our head is, or the shoulder lines are going to be down here, and I'm going to put the head roughly here. And then I start figuring out the rest of my layout. And for the sake of this exercise, it's perfectly fine just to do, oh, this foot's raised off just a little bit. It's perfectly fine just to do skeleton drawings or stick figure drawings, because that's the only information we need here. We don't need to know that we're getting our muscles right. What we need to know is that we're able to, okay, I can tell by the negative space here that this isn't going to work. I need a little bit more length, and this, so that way this sword can be a little bit longer. Okay, so the key things here we're looking for are the bony landmarks, like where our joints are. So I almost look like I'm looking for pose control. Okay, that's the only thing that's important. And then for this one, we have the added bonus of, well, we need to get a shield in here, and it comes up to here, and it comes down to here, and it's pretty much a circle, so we'll try that. Okay, now what we do, and the thing here is, since we're working digitally, do not zoom in, right? That defeats the purpose of what we're doing. But now we're going to work a little bit larger. And I mean, and by the way, with the whole zooming in thing, that that just speaks to the fact that this is an exercise that does work a little bit better when we're working in natural media. I also try to do things like make sure my image is on another monitor, because whenever you're in a situation like where you're nearly in a one-to-one relationship, that can be almost distracting. I'm going to get rid of this for a second. And so now I'm going to come back through and figure out my proportions again. Where's this knee? Where's this foot? Especially in relationship to the other foot. It's also very distracting to think, well, if this is the bottom of the image, the foot needs to be up here. It's like, no, we're doing it to the bottom of the figure as we see it. So it needs to come up there, put the butt there. And I'm actually going to lower this line. Making corrections here is perfectly fine because that means you're getting the feedback. You also kind of want to keep in mind those corrections you've made. So that way I can tell this hand's going to be too high, so I need to lower it. And if anyone's curious, yeah, I'm drawing the first. Well, I guess you guys would be able to figure that out just from the interface. And then I'm going to landmark the top of the shield base with the eye line roughly, and the bottom of the shield's coming just below. And it's okay to go outside the horizontal edges of the box. It's actually the vertical lines that are most important. Okay. All right. So we've done it twice, and then the most important thing is, I should have sent this image to you. Did you find an image to work with, Jeremy, or are you?
No, I'm just working off of your image. I'm just looking at the screen and drawing what you're drawing.
All right. Maybe I can.
I don't know. This is working fine for me. So unless you feel strongly.
But here's what I'm about to do. So now the most important thing is the try-fail cycle. We tried it. Now we need to see what our failures are. And I do this all the time when I'm drawing from quick poses. At the end of my session, I grab you. That's why I like quick poses. You can grab the images after you're done. So I grab the images and I bring them into my file. We'll minimize that. We'll bring this over. And I shrink it to see how well I did. Now you see here on the larger one, I didn't do that bad. I'm going to duplicate this and move it off to the side for the other one later. So I can tell that I do have a bit of a mistake. I got the arm too high. I was like, all right, that's not bad. But I located the knees, the ankles, and the elbow. Well, that elbow I missed. But not too bad there. Let's see how I did on the smaller one. And then the other thing I noticed last week is I realized you weren't focusing so much on the figure, you were focusing more on the proportions of the head. I mean, a lot of these techniques still apply, but the head still is a different.
It's a whole beast unto itself.
Yeah, it is. And it's also really rough because we get different impressions. The Loomis head, unfortunately, the Loomis head is intended to be a tool to standardize our approach to the figure drawing, and then we adjust based on the nature of the identifying traits of the character, whether a nose is longer or whatnot. But so at the end of the day, though, it only can solve so many problems for us. And if you're working from a photo, then you have to. The worst part about it is you don't have nice 1/3 measurements. You have like a 1.33 or whatnot if you have like a longer nose, or if you have a shorter jaw, and it's like a 0.8 instead of a 0.1 in terms of 1/3 of the head, right? So I'm gonna get rid of these layers here, and we can see. Wow, did I really? Oh, yeah. I lost track of which ones. Yeah, so it's interesting. The left one, I lowered the arm, and then the right one, I raised the arm. But at least the knees and the ankles, I got those in the right spot. And I think to a certain extent, I did cheat a little bit in that this was a drawing I did just yesterday. I pulled the file. from yesterday's drawing, so I was warm with this drawing at least. But that just speaks to the fact that if you see you're doing really bad in this context, you just go back to that drawing, pull it back, and give yourself another shot and say, okay, well, how well can I do it again? So I can just as easily duplicate this. I'm going to knock down the values a little bit, and I'm going to draw another box that's a different size between the two, and then I can come back. Where's my other one? There we go. Bring them back, and I can come back and do it again.
I changed the angle of my figure. I had mine leaning over too much. And what's odd is the shield is perfect. The shield fits. Well, here, I'll show you real quick.
Yeah, go ahead. Let's have a look.
So the shield, perfect. But I have my figure leaning way over. I exaggerated the gesture.
Right on. Now, that's another thing about the feedback cycle. When I'm drawing my own gestures, I actually let myself. I consider this a success, because with gestures, sometimes you do want to exaggerate the pose, especially for us in comic book land. So I don't consider this a failure by any means. What I do consider it a failure if you take your gesture and you make it too stiff, if you straighten it up. But if you're taking your gesture and you're actually pushing it a little bit farther, then I think that's a forgivable success, and you should feel comfortable with that. But then again, it's all up to you. It's like, are you really trying to copy what a camera does, or are you trying to be an artist and being able to represent something? That's a question for you as an artist. You have to answer for yourself. You can't let anybody say you're doing it wrong or you're doing it right. It's like you're the one that decides whether or not that's right or wrong. But exaggerating gestures is definitely room for. There's a large degree of tolerance in that manner.
Well, I mean, that's something that I think about a lot, is that for me, the desire is to have the control. Like you said, it's the artist making a choice to exaggerate versus they're exaggerating because they don't have the capacity. And I find that I'm definitely slipping into. I find myself having to find myself having to make assessments to say, wait a minute, is this a choice, or am I just falling into drawing habits? And that's the thing where I feel like I'm in that middle valley between, sometimes it is me saying, oh no, I want this to lean forward. I want this to be taller or broader. And then, half the time it is just, oh, I'm drawing. And then I'm realizing, oh, I'm not doing it right. That whole thing of, I actively try to say, all right, I want to represent this with the proportions it has in the position it has. So it's like being aware of it while giving myself the freedom to make conscious decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing. If there's any one reason why artists are bad artists, to whatever extent you want to use that word, it's because they're stuck in a habit and they haven't taken the time to challenge themselves to expand their range, so that they can do different things at their desires, and to accomplish what it is they're trying to do. But so that's that's a nice hour-long lesson plan. I guess I'm just like programmed into doing that from all of my teaching. But go ahead and put that's it from me. If you want to put the two of us up.
Okay, yeah. Let me switch back, or actually, hang on. Let me switch back to the screen where I've got us plus the ones I was doing. But meanwhile, let's see. Couple of comments from the chat. Let's see. Amar's on my Patreon. So he said he'll share a couple of his fashion drawings he did in Discord.
Yeah, fashion drawings are just amazing because it's like different proportions that you learn, that you're enculturated or indoctrinated into. I always find I used to hate them when I was in college, because it's like, this is something that's going to affect. It's like, it's wrong. It's like comic book land is right and fashion drawings are wrong. And now these days it's complete reverse, where I have a complete respect for them.
Yeah, well, I mean, and that's the thing. It's when you presume, or when any artist presumes that a person's doing something that is a mistake versus a conscious choice. As soon as someone is, because some people will say, well, that's just my style. And that can be a crutch if they don't actually have the ability to correct it or change it. But when someone shows you, no, wait, I can draw this with the exact normal, I can draw this in 7.5 head proportions if I would choose. You know, that's the kind of thing where you're like, oh, okay, you're making a conscious stylistic choice there. Let's see here. Amar also mentioned that for cartoons, the characters he likes to do 3 to 5 heads. Do you ever do any like really cartoony cartooning?
No, almost never. I'm so like my desires are so much more in the realm of the human figure and perfecting my skills in that area. Like the closest I get to like 3 or 5 heads is I'm either like rare occasions I'm trying to draw a toddler. But the other thing is, but I do get into 3 or 5 heads when I'm dealing with like monsters or like birds or anything like that. And it's like so all the rules still apply because you've created your turnaround chart for your character, and it's whatever heads it is, and then I do the line of action. Now, one of the downsides is even number heads versus odd number heads. That makes things a little bit difficult because if you have odd number heads, it's easy to find the middle point, but how do you find the thirds, right? And so that's one of the exercises I didn't do. We did halves, but we didn't do thirds. And that's just taking that exercise to a hard mode. You draw your line and you try to guess how do you divide the line into thirds. I just left that out for the sake of time today, but in the past I have made my sense like, well, okay, you got the halves down. Now let's see if you can do thirds, and then fifths are another matter entirely from that as well.
Well, that's one of the things that I had never seen until I had Loomis's book. Is that Loomis specifically applies, the figure as thirds for female proportions because of the fact that with women's waists versus their hips, guys, we just think of the waist is just a little bit above and the hips a little bit below. But with women having that higher waist, where it comes to a narrower point, higher up on the figure than men with our hips. And it's one of those things where, it really does change the overall silhouette of the figure if you're aware of dividing the female form into thirds versus dividing the men. Men tend to fall closer to that the halves versus the thirds.
Yeah, and the semantics in my head are just exploding right now because I think of the waist as sort of like maybe it's a line from the iliac crest to the iliac crest, but if you think about the waist as like what's the thinnest point of the torso. The reason why that happens on the female is there's a little bit more fat around the iliac crest, and then it comes back in towards the torso. So I was like, and stuff like that would mess me up in college all the time because that knowledge, I just didn't have access to that knowledge through my teachers or through my own ability to research. And we're so lucky that we have resources like Proca and we have everything else online. It makes things a lot easier.
Yeah, because I can tell you that in college, never once we had figure drawing, but we never had anatomy. So we never had an instructor take the time to go over comparative anatomy. Just specifically calling out anatomical tendencies. I was gonna say differences, but there's definitely
I definitely appreciate that word tendencies is a lot better than differences. I have a student that she's a little bummed that she has to take anatomy. I'm like, oh my god, I would love to have had anatomy, and it's like for us it was just figure drawing. It's just standing around staring at a naked figure and trying to get them down on the paper. So we're lucky in our time and space where we do have access to so many more resources now. I noticed this comment that my problem is I have to draw so many different styles. I always feel all over the place. I mean, to whatever degree you have to draw a different style. I mean, I can't speak to that. But I do find that if I have to draw on one style versus another, one technique I have for that is I just keep the mood board or the references of that style up while I'm drawing in that style. And then if I have to change gears to a different style, I put in a little bit of time with that new style, not drawing on the actual project, but just doing the warm-ups, like just copying, for instance. And then once I am getting myself into a good state, and then I have that different mood board, and just having that visual resource up while you're drawing ends up being a good resource to that end.
Oh yeah, I definitely believe. Yeah, visual reference, because visual reference takes so many different forms. Because it can be style, it can be color, it can be I mean, to a certain degree, composition, certain designers and illustrators will have compositional tendencies. And you may want to have reference for all of that if you're doing an image or a sequence of images that need to adhere to or display some of that inspiration. Then yeah, having all of that up to look at while you're creating. Like, have you ever seen that? I've never tried this, but that whole thing where they say, take whatever your mood board is for a piece you're doing and put it in a 9-panel grid and leave the middle grid open and put your thumbnails in the middle. And then when you move it from thumbnails into line art, put your line art in the middle. When you move from that to color, put your color comps in the middle. And that way you can the whole time just see, not just am I capturing the style, but is my polish moving in the direction of being the same quality as the works that you're being inspired by?
Yeah, I've never heard of putting that one in the middle like that, but I like that idea. Like, I'm definitely going to make use of that in the future. That's a good one. But
it takes setting your ego aside, because it's real easy to fall into a trap of negative comparisonitis when looking at it, versus looking at it simply as like reps. Like if you look at it and like you're in PE and you have to do 20 push-ups, and you go there and the first week you do it, you're like, I can do 5 push-ups. And then the next week after another week, you're like, all right, I can do 7 push-ups. I can do 8 push-ups. And looking at it simply more as I'm trying to push my work and elevate in this direction. And it's not about I'm a good artist or a bad artist. It is simply my goal is to push this block this many yards. And that's simply all it is a yardstick. That's kind of a healthier way to think of it, at least I think.
Yeah, I think of it as like being a mechanic. Like I like to bring ourselves back to the trades, where like, it's a dent and you have to hammer it. So you hammer it and it's a little bit more flatter, but now it might have gone towards the other side. So you hammer it from the other side and you just bring it into line with where it needs to be. But absolutely, our ego is definitely, well, I mean, we've talked before about how I'm a stoic, and the ego is the enemy. It's a famous title of a self-help stoic book.
Oh yeah, Ryan Holiday. I follow his stuff. He's very good.
Yeah, so we definitely, it's almost, and to a certain extent, I can be there with some of my students. This might be bad to admit, because who knows which of my students might be listening. But whenever they complain that they're not satisfied with their drawing, on one hand, you want to sympathize, because we've all been there where we weren't happy with what we did. But on the other hand, it's like, then fix it. Then fix it. Keep working at it. You're not done yet. But they don't realize, they think that they did it and they just weren't able to do it. And no, this is part and parcel. I don't know where I got that.
Part and parcel
to the process that you do it, and then if you see something wrong, you fix it. And if you are unhappy with it, but you can't tell what's wrong, then yeah, that's where asking others for feedback and trying to get a little bit more help. But that's one of the nice things about doing a basics exercise like this with our proportions and our figure drawings. We don't need to ask anybody else for help. We can take our photos, we can lay it over our drawings at 50% opacity, and it's right there. And then we can choose to say, well, I do want to exaggerate this arm, or I do want to make this leg look more buff, or I want to make this shield look a little bit smaller, so that way I can reveal more of the clothing. Absolutely.
But it's that instant feedback, and that's a good point. I mean, that was the whole point of you bringing this exercise to us, is that showing us, the difference between not knowing what you're doing or how to fix it, and just simply, this is the wrong answer, this is the right answer. Practice doing it right again. Do it again. And I think people don't necessarily look at learning as iterative. They simply think someone's going to show them a technique, and then they follow the technique, and the art will always be good. And the point of practice is to iterate, to try and fail.
And it's not the student's fault that they think this way. We live in a society that's always results oriented. Do the thing, and it's like you learn math, you memorize the math, or you learn biology, and you memorize all these facts, and then you have to regurgitate it. Our society is not very inclined to the idea that, okay, I'm going to teach you something, and now you're going to practice it and fail, 10 or 15 times before you get it right. I mean, the only place we seem to make any room for that is on the basketball court or in the football fields, where it's like, do it again, do it again, do it again. And so when you come from those two different backgrounds and you come towards art, it's like, well, art, we sat at a desk and we're using a pencil, so this is more like math and biology. And it's like, no, this is a lot more like basketball or dance, where you have to rehearse and do your.
I like dance because dance is still considered one of the arts, but it is an art of practice. It's an art of repetition, and it's an art of refinement. And I think the refinement is the thing. I get frustrated because I even asked the figure drawing instructor that I studied with for years. I'd asked him a couple of weeks ago, and I said, I can accept that I may never be a master draftsman, but there's days when I look at my work after, literally decades of studying the figure, and I'm like, I feel like I should be better than this. It's not about being a master, but there's days where I'm like, what? This is just garbage. And he was just like, you have to just show up. It's that whole thing that people talk about with the muse, even just the act of refining the basic skills, the fundamentals. You show up and you practice. And some days you're rewarded for what his point is even on the days when you are, it appears that you're failing, you're still being rewarded for showing up. You just may not see those rewards until further down the line, weeks down the line, months down the line, years down the line. And that is the point of sticking with it. But there was a comment in the chat that I threw up.
Yeah, this is a great comment. I'm very happy to speak to it, but go on.
93RP1 says, hey, everyone, loving the conversation. Said, hi, John, I have a question if I may. What do you usually find yourself using as reference for figure drawing? Pictures, video, or life?
Right. So this is another pet peeve of mine, because a lot of people will tell you, like, drawing, it's always better to draw from life. And I got to tell you that that's not universal. It's always conditional. We live in a world where you can learn everything in a 2D world, and you can make your representations in a 2D format and never deal with 3D or look from life, and you will be fine. But the weakness is being a person that's able to draw something from 3D. For the most part, they're also going to be able to draw anything from 2D, right? It's like it's just one layer up. The other advantage from drawing from life is you're able to understand the form better, because you can get up from your seat and walk around the figure and see what's really going on. Okay, so that's another plus. But I think, and then being able to sit and take something that you're looking at in 3D and change it to 2D is a skill, and it takes practice, and it takes effort, and something that somebody that's only working from 2D won't be able to do, or at least they're going to have to start developing that skill as well, because you have to make judgments about what you are incorporating in your drawing, because you do have that ability to move around the figure, and then when you come back to your seat, you have to make a decision of what you're putting onto the piece of paper. However, all that being said, I really don't like it when people say drawing from life is better than drawing from a photograph, because photographs have their own strengths. For one thing, they're always there. You don't have to worry about your figure moving. You don't have to worry about you changing from just ducking your head down or starting to sag your shoulders, or your spine going a little bit lower. You don't have to worry about those sorts of things. Your reference is solid. And then not only that, when it comes to references from photos, you have access to so many more models, versus when you're dealing with figure drawing, you only have one model in your location. So there are two different strengths there that you have to appreciate, and you have to make your decision based on context. I don't find myself relying on video that often, but I think the biggest reason for that is because I'm not animating as much as I would like to. So if I was doing animation, or if I was trying to visualize movement, I would be relying on video a lot more. And this, and just a simple unfortunate fact with video is, if you try to do a figure drawing from video, you're going to run into the lossy compression affecting your ability to see details, especially when it comes to things like toes and the fingers. You're just like, how is that working? What's going on there? And you're just not going to get the information that you need. Definitely high res versus low res. High res is always better in that regards.
Well, I was gonna to add on to that though. One thing I found, and I can't remember if it was Paulo Rivera, because I know he shares a lot of his reference on his blog. But I know there was some comic creator that I saw that the tip that they had for using video, the specific reason for it was not capturing movement, but the fact that like if you're doing a pose, it's just like you want to snap a quick shot of yourself and you're working on a comic, take a quick shot and then go and and then keep drawing. If you shoot a photo, you'll shoot them like, well, that pose isn't quite right, or this isn't quite right. Next thing you know, you spend 20 minutes trying to get it just right. Whereas you sit there, you shoot a video, you take the pose, maybe you shift around a little bit, maybe you take a couple of different angles and you stop it. So you've just recorded like a minute of video. And then you just go back and you scrub through until you find the one that like, this is it. And you may have only held it for just a second, but you might spend 20 minutes trying to get that just right angle, whereas you just film yourself for a minute and you're like, it's in there. And that's that I think that's a very specific case.
Yeah.
It's not negating the comments that you made. But
no, I definitely can appreciate that.
Yeah.
That's a little bit like looking in the mirror and it's like, okay, it's like, do I want it here? Do I want it here? Do I want it here? It's like just like teacups. It's like, do I want to talk forward and get that? So yeah, I definitely can. I can definitely appreciate that.
Okay, so
Morby is pushing back on me a little bit. He's like, drive from life is always better, but I mean, I'm for the sake of everybody in the audience.
Well, the other thing is that I know for myself, I use both. I like I said, there's strengths for both. What I do feel that life really does bring, and the reason why people I think tend to have that really push that life drawing over photo reference is that gesture I feel comes through far more when you're in front of a human being than it does in a photo where you're just capturing a moment. Whereas gesture, even if the model is subtly shifting, there's a certain amount of life that I feel like you capture when you're in front of a live model that you don't necessarily get in a photo. And again, that goes back to say it's not about one overall being better than another. It's about strengths and weaknesses, and it depends on the purpose that you're using the reference for. And I think that figure drawing, the best thing I think figure drawing is great for is learning how to create a sense of life in your work from observation, such that you can then take that and then work from photos and inject the same amount of life that you were putting in your figure drawing. Because if you've never done figure drawing in your life and you're just studying from photos, then I do think your work is going to inherently always be stiffer. Whereas if you've learned the fundamentals from the figure and then apply that to photo reference, that's a whole different story. You're bringing something to the table. You're not sacrificing something when you use that photo reference.
Yeah, and we spoke a little bit about, or you spoke to this a little bit to this last week when you mentioned the whole tracing thing. I did realize there's one other thing that I've noticed in my own experiences amongst my students, is that's when it comes to portraiture. So when you're working from a photograph of a person versus when you're doing, having a person sit with you and you do a portrait of their face, there is so much more life in the drawing. And what that speaks to is, even though you're copying a visual representation, you're doing a flawed copy of what you see, and the flaw is the emotional relationship between the subject and the artist, which actually brings all that life to the drawing. It's extra information. And the thing that I did not appreciate when I was in college, for sure. When I was in college, I was thinking very linearly. It's like, how do you draw, and like, how do you get from point A to point B? And I had no appreciation for how much drawing is intuitive, where you make marks that you don't understand, but they're a reflection of you experiencing something in that time and moment, especially when you're sitting down with a subject. So I've always noticed that my drawings of a person's face from life versus my drawings of photographs of them, the drawings from life always have a lot more vibrance to them. So that I think, and then as artists, we learn that we have to keep that vibrance up even when we do our initial portraits of a person, but then we go back later and we're trying to use photographs as reference to try to tighten up details. We learn that we have to keep the intuitive and keep the experiential phenomena and get that into the paper as well, or into the illustration.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's one of those. It's just an ongoing for all of these things. I mean, it comes down to exactly what you said with the very beginning, with just the lines and measuring, comparing, your divisions. It's a feedback loop, and whether it's comparing portraiture from photos versus portraiture in real life, whether it's the whole figure in gesture, whether it's doing the lines like that, all these things, it's a constant feedback loop, and being sensitive and aware of what you're learning from these other ways of interpreting reality.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. All right. So unfortunately, that eats up my time, and I have to get going. But I want to thank you for bringing me on, and I was happy to be able to share my knowledge and my experiences, and I hope the audience finds them useful.
Well, I appreciate you coming on. And real quick, if anyone wants to find John, you can catch him. His Instagram is instagram.com/John Ercek, and that's JOHNERCEK.
Yep. And if you go there, you'll see all plenty of examples of my figure drawings. So you'll enjoy having a look at that, and some of my digital painting as well.
Well, it was great to have you on. You're welcome back anytime. And anytime you have some stuff where you see me, you're like, hey, Jeremy's audience might benefit from this, or Jeremy might benefit from this, please shout out. And it's always good to catch up. I'll let you go and close out the show. Thanks so much, John.
All right. Thank you, Jeremy.
All right. Good to see you. Take care. All right, guys. So that was my buddy, John Ercek, art educator, comic book color artist, illustrator and artist in his own right. Excellent creator, and a good friend. And it's always good to catch up with him. I appreciate him coming here and sharing his knowledge with me and with the rest of us. Let's see here. And I also see, Artistic Jiu-Jitsu said, thanks, John. You too, Jeremy. Well, you're more than welcome. It's all about sharing what we learned here. And 93 RP1 also says, thank you, John, for your time and feedback. So like I said, guys, definitely check out his Instagram. You guys can follow him there, see more of what he's sharing with his students and what he's teaching. Last couple of comments from Amar that I missed. And he said, art is not meant to be perfect. As it is in life, there is no perfection. He said the perfection's in the imperfection. Such as true as Bob Ross would say, the happy accidents. So, all right, guys, this was a nice art education episode here. And, I'm always about learning and growing and ensuring that process. So I hope you guys took something from this as well. If there's any new viewers, please definitely hit that subscribe button so you'll know when we go live with live streams. We're here every Sunday. And if you know people who would like these, if you know other people who are art fans, art students that are learning, growing, and studying, share the live stream with them. Hit that share button and forward it to them. Let's see here. I realized I forgot to have the patron ticker running at the bottom of the screen this whole stream. I got so excited about having John on. I just ran in, got excited about that. If you enjoy these live streams, like to get bonus live streams twice a month, you can become a Patreon subscriber at patreon.com/Jeremy. It's patreon.com/GERIMI. As little as $2 a month gets you in the door. We do a thing called Art Book Study Group where we do deep dives, do some of the best art books around, try to suck out all the knowledge we can. We also have a Patreon exclusive Discord server where we share feedback, works in progress, tips, art talk, and more. And you get access to an online archive of my comic books so you can read them digitally. If you'd like to get a free digital sketchbook, work in progress animated GIFs, blog posts about what I'm reading, what I'm watching, what's inspiring me creatively, you can sign up for my free monthly newsletter at newsletter.jeremy.net. And if you'd like to purchase physical copies of my comic books, or if you read digitally on Kindle, you can go to amazon.jeremy.net. I'll forward you to my Amazon author page where you can pick up books like my first graphic novel, Eye of the Gods. It's a standalone psychological thriller about a man cursed with visions he cannot control. You can also pick up my most recent project, Morningstar. It is a retelling of Lucifer's Fall from Heaven as a Western. It's an 8-issue comic book series. Volume 1 contains issues 1 through 4. Volume 2 contains issues 5 through 8. Both volumes have extensive back matter, character sketches, character designs, thumbnails, page layouts, script excerpts, and more. I basically show you how I put the entire book together. And if you want to see what's inside these books before you buy, go to the homepage of my YouTube channel. If you scroll down to the book flip-throughs, you can actually see inside the book. I filmed videos of the interior, so you can check that out before you buy. All right, guys. Thank you again for spending time. Thanks once again to John Ercek for coming by and sharing his knowledge with us. All right, guys. That's it for now. Go be creative.